Thank you for joining me today in my garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Station. As you can probably hear in the background, today is a really blustery day, and we've been having a lot of those lately. An unusual amount for our town and area. Very windy, and it's been quite cool most of the spring. We're looking forward to some warmer weather later this week. We're into May now, and so it's time to start thinking about a little more planting and about being frost-free. Hopefully we are at this point not going to have another really cold spell. And we have some hot weather, as I said, looking like it's in the forecast for the immediate future, but then I imagine it will become cooler again. Hopefully this wind will go down. The wind is drying everything out because we've also been a little low on rain. So we've had to do some watering as we plant things. And planting is the order of the day about now. I'm in the herb garden, and many of the herbs have come up, and we can use the oregano, tarragon, lemon balm, chives, definitely. The chives are all budded up, and then we'll have some nice purple blooms on those soon. Sorrel, I've been using that, and thyme. And so we have, quite a few things we can use from the garden. Other things will come along as we plant them. And I'm going to be planting some herbs that are a little more hardy. I'm still not going to plant basils and some of the more tender herbs. Stevia is pretty tender, and lemon verbena and lemongrass are all tropical. So I really want to wait until the end of May, early June to put those in the ground to make sure that we are indeed frost-free and that nighttime temperatures are over 50 degrees. But I can plant. I have a nice little rosemary plant here. I have some parsley to put along the edge up by my thyme device. And then I'm going to plant some mint over here. This area has been kind of empty, and I decided I'd like to put a few different kinds of mint in. I already have some orange mint, some chocolate mint, and I have some, I think, mojito mint, but I wanted to get some different ones. There's so many different kinds of mint, and so I have already dug some holes. But I do want to put some compost into the holes. This soil is not very good, and mint likes it a little richer and a little damper, and the compost will hold the moisture a little better if it continues to be dry, especially. So I'm going to put a little compost in each of the holes, and then I will be adding the plants, removing them. This one is Kentucky Kernel mint. That sounds like a good one. And it really smells good. And we'll just put on the gloves. And this one, if you had a lot of roots circling around the base of the pot, you'd want to loosen them a little bit. You want this to kind of spread out a little bit in the planting area. So just kind of loosen those roots. This one is not bad. It has nice roots. And then I'm just going to plant it in the compost base and cover it up. And we'll do the same thing with this one, which is a pineapple mint. Now this is a variegated plant, and I do know that variegated plants often, and I'll leave my tag with it, but variegated plants often are not as hardy as these straight plants. So if you are planting something that you want to make sure continues to grow through the seasons, pick the straight plant rather than the one with the variegated leaves. However, it makes a nice variation if you know that it may not survive too many winters. And again, I'm just going to pack that into the compost area. And I'll probably top dress these with a little of the compost too, once I've watered them in. And this third mint is a strawberry mint. And you can smell a little strawberry as you pinch the leaves on this one, which might be a fun one to use with strawberries that will be coming up soon. And again, we'll put that right into the damp compost. We have quite a few rocks in here that need to come out. So I remember what they are, and then I want to water them in good. Whenever you plant anything, be sure to water it in, even if the ground is damp. It helps the soil to fill in around the roots of the plant. We'll want to keep these watered. And what I'm going to do is, around each one, put a little more of the compost to enrich the soil in this area. I would love to have enough compost to put all over my gardens, but I just don't ever seem to be able to make as much. You can purchase compost, but I try to use what I can produce here myself. So there, we've planted an area of mint, which should be developing over the summer. And then I'll come back and plant my other plants, a sage, a rosemary, and I have half a dozen parsley plants, which will make a little edging for my top layer of my herb garden. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. See what's happening there. Here I am in the perennial garden, and I'm by a lily, and this is a lovely lily that's coming up, and it's time to start watching for red lily beetles. If you have lilies, the red beetles are not as prevalent as they once were. They released a few years ago a predator fly that attacks the lily beetles, and it seems to be helping. A few years ago, it was impossible to grow lilies in this area without them being completely eaten up by these red beetles. I still find a few, and I keep looking, and you kind of look under the leaves, and there are several ways to deal with them. The most prevalent is to just squash them. That's what I prefer to do, but you can also use bio-neem on them, a neem spray. I don't like to use sprays. Neem is one of the safer ones, and it is effective, but if you can just check your lilies every day or so and remove any that you find, you should be okay and able to enjoy lilies. But it's time to start looking for them right now. The cool weather has been very good for our spring bulbs. We're still seeing quite a show of the later tulips and daffodils. Daffodils are early, mid-season, and late, and tulips are in the same category. You can get some that are very early and some that are later. Well, we're into the later ones now, the later daffodils and the later tulips. Other things are starting to put on buds. We'll soon have other flowers, and you can see a lot of the foliage has come up and is taking over. So one of the things as the foliage comes up, and I know that some of the plants are taller than others, what I'm doing is placing supports around them. This helps me if I want to cut back on the size by digging some of them out, maybe moving some of the plants to another area, but keep them in a specific area. It helps kind of guide them, but it also, this plant will get about this tall before it blooms, and it will be supported. If we keep having this wind, everything's going to blow over, and some of these supports will help hold things up as they grow. Learn as you plant your plants which ones are going to fall over, and that's where you can add supports. And I have a support right here. I've also planted some new lily bulbs. You can plant lilies either in the fall or in the early spring, and I've planted a few more which have not yet come up. But I've put supports around this Boltonia and around some phlox. We still have a few tulips over here, and we're doing some planting. And I'm going to do some planting. Let me move around back of this rose so that I don't get stuck. And what I'm going to plant now is a Monarda or bee balm. This is a purple one that was given to me by a friend. And I want to put that into the garden in an empty spot. And I've already dug a hole for it. And as she potted it up, she put a nice piece of cloth in the bottom, or not cloth, paper in the bottom. It looks like a coffee filter. This helps keep the soil in the pot when you're sharing plants. It's a nice way to do it, but you don't plant it in the hole with the plant itself. And we'll just put that in the hole. And again, water it in. And as this one grows, I will probably put a plant support on it as well, because it will get several feet tall. But again, it's been so dry. You want to make sure to keep your new plants watered. It's too soon to put in tropical plants and annuals, but certainly there will be space for those later on. The bulbs that we've had have been, I've been deadheading them. I've left a few of them on here to show you that I just take the blooms off, and I go around every couple days and take off the spent blooms. It makes for a neater garden, and it helps the bulb. The energy then from the sun will go to the bulb beneath rather than to make seed on top. We still have a few late tulips here that haven't bloomed yet, and a nice primrose down in front. There are some iris here that are all budded. I can see some buds there. They will be out in a couple weeks. If we get our 85-degree temperature, it may be very quick that they come out. But I take the seeds off of the bulbs, and then make sure that you let your bulbs die back naturally. You take some patience to do that, because you really, when they start to turn brown and flop over, you have the inclination to pull them out or to braid them or tie them or put them somewhere, but you really need to leave the bulbs so that they get the sun and the energy from the sun that forms a bulb underneath, so you'll have blooms next year. If you do that, you should have blooms again. Again, over here I have another lily, and again, that's another one I'll check. So far I haven't found any of the red beetles, but I keep looking because very soon they will be out. We've had, as I said, because it's been cool, the bulbs have been really beautiful this year. And we've had a good season. The wind has not been very helpful. It's blown some of the petals away. But by and large, the tulips have been lovely, and the daffodils, and the hyacinths. Hyacinths are gone at this point. But other things are coming up. And when you plant around bulbs, you want to plant something that's going to cover that dying foliage. This is a tulip, which is already bloomed, and I've cut off the little tops of the blooms, and around it is some artemisia, which will grow up to about 18 inches or so, and this is a daylily, and that will expand, and it will cover up some of that bulb foliage as it's browning. It's okay to cover it up. You just don't want to braid it or knock it down or cut it off. The roses have been fertilized for the first time. They'll get another dose of fertilizer about the end of May, and look forward to some blooms in early June. Other things are coming up. Butterfly weed, if you have it, which is the orange milkweed. that the butterflies love so much. I have it right here, and it's just tiny right now. It's a very late to arise, and you start to think that maybe it isn't coming back, and then it does. So you have to kind of learn your plants and which ones come up early and which ones come up late and which ones will spread out all over the place. And that would be black-eyed Susans, which are right in here. And I have to go into some of these other areas and pull out black-eyed Susans, because otherwise I would have the whole area full of them. I know from experience that this aster gets very large. I've put a support in that's a little taller right now. Last year I didn't support it and it flopped all over. I would like to have it stand a little bit, so I have put a support around it. We have a couple clematis that are growing up trellises and posts along with the rows over here, and they're budded, so we will have blooms of those the end of May or first part of June. And alliums. This is a white allium, and it's budded, and it looks like it's going to have quite a few blossoms on it. A tree peony, again with buds, and these will be large flowers, probably about this big, dinner plate size. I will want to come in here with a stake. This is a rather loose branch, and these large blooms, it will have 4 large blooms on it, heavy blooms. So I need to get in with a post and some strings and tie it so that it doesn't break the stem. Especially if this wind continues, we may be in danger of losing a large branch and a lot of blossoms unless I get it tied. Peonies will be blooming. Again, we have primroses down at the base along with the tulips, and a number of plants that could be divided. I will mention that the Garden Club is holding their annual sale. Most of the Garden Club members have been dividing their plants for the sale, getting them ready. They're being priced as I speak, and they will be on Town Hill on Saturday, and they'll have a number of plants, very nice plants that you know grow in Norfolk because they've been raised here and provided by Garden Club members. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden and see what we can do there. There's lots of work to be done still in May. This is an area next to my driveway, and I don't usually come over to this area, but right now it is full of bloom, and I did want to show you some of the things that are here. The blue flower is a Brunera, and it comes both in several variegated varieties and a plain variety. This is the plain variety, and it blooms in May with these lovely forget-me-not type blooms. The tulips that you see in the variety of colors are what are called Botanical Tulips. And I do mail order them. They are usually in a specialty tulip section, but they are late and they are quite perennial. They come back really well, and they bloom later on in a variety of bright colors, and they're really kind of fun. They're short, they're little tulips, but they're kind of fun to have late in the season. And as I said, they have a variety of white or bright colors, and this one is a red and white striped one, yellow, orange, more orange and yellow combinations. I've got a red one with a blue center and yellow ones. So they add to an area. They will be gone in another month. Their foliage is, as you can see, quite narrow compared to most tulip foliage, and the foliage disappears rather quickly. So they're kind of nice to put in an area where you might want to put something else later on. But I thought I would show you. And hostas in here are continuing to grow. This is a somewhat shady area now. It becomes more shady as the tree leaves out that's above it. So now we'll go over to the vegetable garden and do a little work there. In the vegetable garden, and I have fruit in the vegetable garden in one area, and I have strawberries and raspberries. The raspberries are leafed out, and mulched, and I have the strawberries that I planted last year. Last year I had to take all the blossoms off. It's a hard thing to do, but I had some of the old strawberries left, so we did get a few. But this year, they've really taken hold, and as you can see, they're full of blossoms, and each of those blossoms will potentially be a strawberry. So we're looking forward to a good harvest of strawberries in about a month. Now, I have a good protection around my garden in that I have an electric fence, which is what I started with when we were having woodchuck problems, and that helped with those. But then the rabbits started to bother me quite a bit. So I put an interior fence of rabbit fencing up inside the electric fence, which has a low wire and then a medium wire and then a tall wire for the deer. So far I've been pretty lucky. However, chipmunks and birds can still get in, and they all like strawberries. So I will be putting some net over the strawberries. Once they start forming berries and they start turning red, I use just nylon dress netting that you can get at a fabric store. It's cheaper than the netting from the garden store, and it seems to work better because it's a smaller, finer netting. And it lasts several years, and we just roll it up at the end of the season and put it away. Next to the strawberries, I've planted last month the onion sets, and they've come up, and we have small onions. In another couple weeks, we can pick every 2 or 3 onions, leave every third one, and they will make full onions, and we'll have scallions from those that we pick. I also planted peas, and they're coming up. A little rain would have helped, and hopefully we'll get a little rain. I've put in my posts, and I'll be putting net on this. These are peas that will climb a bit, so I want some netting for them to climb so they don't just sprawl all over the ground. They're much easier to pick that way. But the peas are up and growing. I could also put a little fertilizer near them, but I will wait until we have a time when I know it's going to rain, or that I will be watering them before I put that down. We have radishes, and next to the leeks there was a little extra space, so I planted some radishes. The leeks were planted in the fall. And then spinach. Spinach is like the cool weather really well. It's not going to like the hot weather if we get a few hot days. But if it goes back to being a little cooler, it will be happy. It came up well. I also planted some arugula and some Swiss chard and some lettuce in this row, and there's parsley at the end. And the parsley was last year's parsley, which is in its 2nd year and will go to seed shortly after it has blossomed. And now I'm going to plant a few more things. Actually, you can plant almost anything at this point. But today I want to plant some lettuce starts, and these are starts that I did inside. If I can get them out nicely. I have a few. I have more lettuce that's coming up. This will be a little faster. It's a little further along than what we put in from seed a couple weeks ago. I've used string to make a row, and we'll just put these in and put the dirt around them. I'll put these about 6 or 8 inches apart. Once I've filled this row, I can take the string off. And I have a little extra dirt up there. And again, water, 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 especially since we're in the middle of the day and it's a hot day, or windy day, and dry. The next thing I will be planting, yeah, if we spill the water, that's always good, is some celery that I bought. Yes, you can grow celery here, and it's really good. Fresh celery is really quite tasty. And I'll just plant a couple of these now and come back and do the rest later. And again, this is fairly root bound, so I'll want to just kind of break apart the roots a little, or even take the bottom part off. But you want to loosen it out so it has someplace to go. And again, put it in. Anytime you have a plant that's root bound this way, and they get that way in these little containers fairly quickly. Just loosen it up. But fresh celery is quite different from what you get in the grocery store. It's much tastier. Again, water. And then I'm going to move down this way. And first of all, I'm going to plant a few seeds. And I have them in my pocket because of the wind. The packets would be blowing all over if I were. I'm going to plant a couple herbs. And again, I've made a little furrow for them. These don't have to be planted too deep. I'm planting some cilantro, which is an herb we like. Not everyone likes it, but we do. And because it goes to seed fairly quickly, I don't want to plant too much at once. I'll save some of the seeds for later. And we'll just cover that lightly and pat it down. Put a little rock in to mark where that crop ended. I have quite a few rocks in my garden. It is well drained, but it still grows. The next one I'll plant is some dill. And you'll notice the structure right here is the teepee is going to hold cucumbers. So it'll be nice to have the dill kind of next to the cucumbers so that we can have cucumber and dill salad. And again, not too much at a time because it too will go to seed. Perhaps a little more of that. And another good-sized rock at the end. Could also use stakes. And the next thing I'm going to plant is a flower, and it's called Dara, and it's a carrot relative, and it has lovely, almost Queen Anne's lace-like flowers, only they come in colors. Queen Anne's lace is also a carrot relative. And this is seed I saved from plants last year, so we're hoping it grows. And the seeds are quite tiny. I'll put this along here. And this will take quite a while to germinate. I won't expect to see this for 3 or 4 weeks. And again, a couple rocks to mark at the end of that row so that I'll know that I can plant something else. You can also plant now beets, carrots, more lettuce, beans, almost any vegetable that you can think of. Cucumbers can be planted around the base of the teepee, and then I'll put strings on the teepee as they start to climb, and they'll climb it. Makes it easier to pick them. Not quite time to put in your peppers, tomatoes, and eggplant, but I do have the supports up for tomatoes, so I know where they're going to go. You want to try to locate your tomatoes, and actually most plants, a little different than where they were the year before. This helps if you've had any pests. It kind of confuses them. If you plant them in a different area, they may not find the plant this year if you had trouble last year in another area. So you try to rotate the crops a little bit. It helps get a good harvest. And now I have a few more plants that I'm going to put in. Remember all the milk jugs I have in back. And those I planted in February and put outside and just forgot about them until a couple weeks ago. And I have cabbage, I have piracicaba, which is a kind of like a broccolini, and more broccoli, some flowers, some leeks. Many of these can all go into the garden at this point. I only had 3 of the jugs that have yet to germinate. Some of them may yet germinate or not. A lot of them were saved seed of questionable quality, so they may not germinate at all, but it's always worth a chance. Most of them did just fine. And as you can see, I have some very nice little broccoli plants. And these were planted way back in February. And I need to take them out of the milk jug, and you'll see I have lots of roots, and I tried not to plant them too thickly so that I can plant them about a foot apart in the garden at least. And we will have a row of broccoli here ultimately. And again, I will water these, and I'll come back and plant the rest of them a little later. I'm going to give them a little water though. So I will continue planting, and I'll have the garden completely filled by the time I see you next month with all my plants. By the end of the month, Memorial Day is kind of a typical day to plant your tomato plants. Some people start them earlier and get good luck with it. I usually just wait until Memorial Day. By then, we know it's not going to frost generally, and I don't have to worry about running out and covering them up at night. But if you want to plant them early, that's fine. Just be aware that you have to watch the weather a little closely and keep them watered and covered in case there's a frost. Now let's head back to the shade garden. Things are really coming up in the shade garden. We still have hellebores that have been blooming for about 3 months, but now they have foliage to go with the blooms. Remember, I cut off all the old foliage, and we had blooms, and now we have blooms that are starting to go to seed, and you can see the seed pod forming. I'm going to want to get in here and cut them. I have enough hellebores. In fact, I have little hellebores coming up here and there all over the place because I didn't take the seed pods off in past years, but I will probably take them off this year if I have the time to do it. This keeps them from reseeding all over. I do like the plants. and they will stay with this nice foliage all summer. But the blooms are still going, and it's their third month. Now we have the addition of ferns that are just starting to unfurl, and we have the epimedium, which is still blooming a little, but its foliage is coming out. Some of it is a little more colorful, and a lot of hosta is starting to unfurl. I've been out with my deer spray and my pellets for slugs. The product I use for slugs is a non-toxic product, and the deer spray is as well. It's a garlic and raw egg mix, I believe. It's quite smelly, but the deer don't like the smell, and that's how it repels them. And I start early with it and use it fairly often, especially after a rain. They say it lasts a number of weeks, maybe even months, but I don't trust it, and I spray them a little more often. And so far the deer have kind of avoided me. Again, starting early helps. They form their movement patterns early in the spring. And if they start avoiding your yard, why, they usually continue avoiding your yard for a while. Bleeding heart is also in bloom, and this one is just coming up. And I did put a support around it. Fortunately, because of all this wind we've had, it hasn't blown over at this point. And another plant back here is dogtooth violet. And it's a pretty little flower. It is a native flower to maybe not our area exactly, but into Connecticut and New York at least, and possibly some of them here as well in some areas. So that's what's coming up here. And we have a lot of what looks like grass, but it's actually crocus foliage. Remember, this area was full of little early winter crocuses, and this will all go away. I know it isn't grass because when I look at it, I see this nice little white stripe down the middle of each leaf, and grass doesn't have a little white stripe down the middle of each leaf. So I know these are crocus foliages, and they will brown out soon, and then this area will be open so that I can put some annuals in, and it will look a little fresher. Now let's move back to the pond. I finally got the pond set up with its skimmer and filter and pump and little waterfall. And now it's time to start having it clean itself up so that it becomes clear. And in order to do that, I add several products. And one of the products is called Instant Fix, and it's an enzyme. And I've added it, and it actually makes it look worse for a while before it gets better. And the other is called a muck buster, and I'll throw that in. And you just throw these in. And they're enzymes primarily that will break down any organic matter and help the filter clear it. My skimmer has a pad in it which I need to clean almost every day right now while the pond is still going through its cleaning phase. It had a lot of organic matter in it. It still has the fish in it. We can't see them right now. We could see them a month ago, but things have gotten a little murky. So, and with the wind, a lot of things have been blowing into it, like flower petals and leaves and maple seeds. They've been picked up by the skimmer, but I need to clean the skimmer almost daily at this point in order to hasten the clearing of the pond. But it'll get there, and in another month, hopefully we'll have a clear pond. And then I'll start adding the tropical plants that I add that have spent the winter inside. Looking over to this side, we have a number of ground covers, ferns, hosta, and a ground cover of sweet woodruff. I also have this in my herb garden. It is an herb. It's a little ground cover, and it is edible, and it is the herb that makes May wine. And we'll be making some Macma wine inside when we go inside. So let's go inside and start doing some cooking with some of the things we have, or just some of the seasonal products. Today I'm going to be making some items that you could use in combination for a nice spring luncheon, perhaps on the patio if the wind ever stops blowing. I don't recommend going out on the patio today. I had thought about it, but with the way the wind is blowing, I think things would be blowing away. So I'm going to start by making some tarts and putting them in the oven. And what I have done is made a little crust, and the crust recipe is 1 cup of flour, half a cup of butter, and 3 ounces of cream cheese mixed together. Very simple crust. You don't need to grease the pan. And you make little balls with the mixture after you've chilled it a little bit, and then put it into the muffin pan. You actually don't even need to chill it if you don't want to. And then you just form it into a little crust. And then we have to make a filling for it. And for that, I have melted some chocolate, half a cup of chocolate chips. And I'm giving you the full recipe, though I'm not necessarily making a full recipe. And then we're going to add to that a 1/4 cup of sugar. And stir it together here. Actually, it's a half a cup of sugar to a half a cup of chocolate chips. Let me read you the right recipe. Yeah. And I had 2 tablespoons of butter melted with the chocolate. Stirred in that, and then I want to add 1 egg. And since I'm working with a half recipe, I'm using the egg product, pasteurized egg product. And 2 tablespoons would be half an egg, but you would be using a whole egg. And a half teaspoon of vanilla. And I can put these back here, out of the way. And I'll stir this together. You want to get it smooth. It's a brownie mixture, basically. These are brownie tarts. And then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of flour. I'm trying to give you the whole recipe instead of the half. And half a cup of nuts. And then we're going to fill each of these little cups with some of the brownie mixture. Actually, you can use these for little pumpkin pies, the same cups, or you can use jam and a little cake batter. And make a variety of little individual desserts. have to take a little from some of these that are too full, because this does make a dozen little ones. The full recipe will make 2 dozen. And get it all off the spoon. We'll put these in the oven at 350 for half an hour. And then we'll dress those up when they come out of the oven. The next thing I want to make are some muffins, and these are dandelion muffins. And I thought I'd try this recipe because it just looked interesting. And again, I'm making a quarter recipe. It calls for a whole cup. The whole recipe calls for 1 whole cup of dandelion petals. If you've ever pulled dandelion petals off dandelions, you'll know why I'm making just a quarter cup recipe or a half recipe total. They're fluffy and they're yellow, but they take a lot of time to pull off because you don't want the green base. You just want the little dandelion petals. And you want to make sure they're from a yard that hasn't been sprayed with pesticides or fertilizers. So in the bowl, again, I'm going to read the full recipe, but I'm only making a portion of it. Be 1½ cups of flour, a cup of rolled oats, oatmeal, a tablespoon of baking powder, a ½ teaspoon of salt, and then also in there is a quarter cup of sugar. And then to that, we want to add a cup of milk, a quarter cup of vegetable oil, or melted coconut oil will work, and a quarter cup of honey. And I have the appropriate amount in this little cup. And we'll stir that together and then add the 1 cup of dandelion petals. Dandelion greens are something that people do eat. We have also a ½ teaspoon of salt. And then I'll add the dandelion petals. And for this recipe, you definitely do want to grease the muffin cups, or else they will stick. And we'll add a little to each one. And the original recipe would make a full-size muffin and make a dozen. Large muffins by using the, or 4 dozen of the little ones. And we have some that are a little smaller, so we'll just add a little more. These are going to go in the oven at 400 degrees and only about 15 minutes. at most, or let's see what it does say 15 minutes, or perhaps a little more at 400 degrees. And when they come out, I've already made a few, they will look like this. Little muffins, and you can serve those with a little butter or a little honey. And we'll put those out over here right now and work on our salad. And this is going to be what's called a salmon Cobb salad. Now, I did go on the internet to look up Cobb salad because I knew this wasn't the original Cobb salad. And the original came from Hollywood's Brown Derby restaurant, and it was named for the owner, Robert Howard Cobb. And there is some dispute about the recipe's genesis. Was the first Cobb salad made by Cobb and the theater mogul Sid Grauman while rummaging through the restaurant's cooler for a late-night snack in 1939, or by the restaurant's executive chef, Robert Kreis, who created it for the restaurant's 1929 launch. So it's old. The recipe is very old. This is a variation on it. Either way, the original recipe was a head of lettuce, watercress, avocado, tomatoes, cold breast of chicken, hard-boiled eggs, cheese, crumbled bacon, and some old-fashioned French dressing. There are many, many variations, and this is one that I'm making today. And this is quite different, but it is the original chopped salad. It's going to have layers, and it would make a very nice luncheon dish. People can then take what they wish from it. And I'm using some different things, even from the recipe that I had for the salmon part of the salad. And the first thing I'm going to put in is some salmon, and we'll make a layer of that down the middle. And this is cooked salmon that has been flaked, fresh. And we want to make some nice layers here along the way. And then my recipe called for corn. I decided I didn't really want corn in the salad, so I'm using farro, which is a grain, and I've cooked the farro, and we will use a layer of farro along this edge, I guess. And farro is a chewy variety of wheat. It's kind of an old-fashioned recipe that's kind of come back into, but this makes it more of a wholemeal salad to have a nice grain involved in it too. Then we're going to put a layer of red onion. Maybe not all of those. Some cherry tomatoes. And again, maybe not quite all of them. I'm going to quarter some hard-cooked eggs. If you have an Instant Pot, do try to make hard-cooked eggs in the Instant Pot. They're the best way to make them. You will not be disappointed. They're easy to peel, and they work very quickly. And layer of hard-boiled egg, and then we want our avocado. And avocado is one of those things that is best used fresh. I'm going to cut it apart and I'm going to use a grapefruit knife to go around the edge. Relieve it from its skin here. And we'll do the same with the other side. And then I can cut it. Remove the pit. And I'm going to just cube that. And we'll put it between the salmon and the onion. I think I needed a bigger dish. And those are the salad ingredients. And then we need to make a dressing for the salad. I'm going to start with some lime juice, and I've got about 3 tablespoons of lime juice. And I'll add 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm pressing a clove of garlic into that. And 2 tablespoons of chopped cilantro, 2 tablespoons of chopped dill, and salt and pepper. Calls for a teaspoon of salt, but we don't use as much salt, so I'm not going to use that much. And 1/8 of a teaspoon of fresh black pepper. And we'll combine those. And that's our dressing. And I'm not going to dress the salad right now, but we'll serve it with it. So that people can take their own pieces. There's the lettuce underneath, the bed of lettuce under, and all the nice ingredients on top, and then drizzle it with the herb dressing. Now, the last thing I want to show is the garnish for the tarts. And I did make some frosting. You could use any type of chocolate frosting out of the jar, would work just fine. And I'll just do a few of these. But they're pretty easy to put some chocolate frosting on top. We've put some frosting on them, and now I want to do something with some violets. And I have some violets that I picked, and I have some made up the equivalent of 1 egg white with some meringue powder, rather than using a real egg white because it's used raw. And then I'm using quick dissolve extra fine sugar in a little bowl. And what I'll do is, and I've done on this bunch, is to use a small paintbrush and coat the petals of the violets with the mixture front and back. And then dip them in the sugar, the fine sugar, until they're coated. front and back, and then put them on the baking sheet. And I will continue doing that. And then these I did earlier, and you can see they've dried. I dry them overnight. You don't use the stem. And then just use one petal of the violet as your garnish. That's all it takes. You could use the whole violet. You can also do violas, or you could do lilacs as well. The lilacs I have found don't last as well. On the other hand, the violets, I will take off the stems and I will pack these in wax paper in a little tin container and put it in the freezer, and they last a very, very long time. But it just gives a little taste of the violet. On each one, and they are candied. But again, stored in the freezer, they last and can be used all winter as a cute little garnish. So there we have our salad and now we need something to drink, and what I'm going to make is Macma wine. And May wine is generally made with Woodruff, and they use a sect wine. I think it's a Riesling. It's a German thing that's made, and then champagne, and they put the Woodruff into the wine and let it steep. I've used apple juice and let that steep, and then I'm going to garnish each one with a couple strawberry pieces, which is also traditional, and pour in a bit of the Woodruff, and if a little goes in, that's okay too, as a little garnish. This is generally steeped overnight if it's in the wine or the grape juice. I kind of made this one up as a non-alcoholic version. And then finish it off with seltzer instead of champagne. Now the champagne would be very nice too, but the seltzer works very nicely. You have a nice spring drink to go with your salad, luncheon. And let's get some things over here. We've got these two and a spring centerpiece. With some lilacs, fresh lilacs, and a few of the later daffodils. And that's the show for today. I'm Liz Davey. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable.